send me the intro and outro.
It's in the 401 box.
It's in the Dropbox.
It's in Dropbox. Yeah, it was up there a couple.
You remember the name of it?
401 intro. 401 S3 season 3 intro. And then there's the closing credits.
Is it under show graphics?
That's a good question. Dan set it up. You should see
audio. Okay, here we go. 60-second bumpers.
Once you fade us in, and we can figure that out.
Disclaimers and intros. Yeah, I'll show you.
Posture.
Okay.
Dan has to go to the bathroom right now. You're gonna have to do some talking. I think you'll be fine with it.
Are we ready?
I wasn't yelling at you.
Ready?
Yeah.
Hang
Mia
on,
said
let
she
me get
can't
ready.
call in until 20 minutes, so she can just listen maybe. Or
Let's hit it, people.
5, 4, 3, 2.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the 401 show. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
I'm Dave. We're here with Al. We've got a couple of people on a secret mission halfway across the country. We've got a friend who's going to be joining us in a little bit, United Airlines pilot Captain Dan Hanley, with a pretty incredible story. Several, actually. So this is the live recording of episode 24.
Yeah.
Because we do let people watch live. But it's really our edited episodes that have the support material. That's where the bread and butter is. Nonetheless, as usual, we run this place kind of like you would run your living room. It's a group of friends. That's really what this is. We are broadcasting from Cave Radio Broadcasting. It is Detroit's #1 broadcasting platform. Do you guys have a slogan, Al, that you know what I'm saying? Oh, you can't hear us right now.
We are say what you want, play what you want.
Gotcha. Well then, I'm going to start talking. We do have a shout out because we put up a contest a couple of weeks ago. And Katie, we have 2 winners to this?
We do. We have 2 winners. So Sharon Sullivan is the one who commented on the original post, and then I had shared that post to my personal Facebook page, and Caitlin Jewell was the first one to know the answer on my personal Facebook
Gotcha.
page.
Caitlin Jewell, Sharon Sullivan, congratulations.
Yeah. Congrats.
And what was a little post we put up, because one of this show's taglines, and there's a bunch of them, but it is "For we wrestle not against what you think." And that's a take on Ephesians 6:12, which is "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and the spirits of darkness in high places," yada yada. And of course they're talking about ranks of demons, because at the end of the day we are in a spiritual war, and hopefully people figure it out before they get off this rock. If not, so Sharon Sullivan and your friend
Caitlin Jewell.
Caitlin Jewell, another Caitlin. Are you Caitlin?
I'm a Kathleen. I'm a Katie that's a Kathleen. It's not very common, but it is very common in Ireland. So
it was a big name in the 70s.
Well, like, I'm first generation American, so that's,
oh, really?
Yeah.
So your parents have an accent?
My dad had an accent, yeah.
The Irish.
Very thick Irish accent, yes. Indeed.
Today, we're going to be, like I said, we're going to be talking to Dan Hanley. We've got some inside information about 9/11. He was a former United Airlines pilot. Yes, the guys that fly those big airplanes that little kids look up to, like I did. He was also a Navy pilot. I'm going to have him fill in the details, but I believe he was in the Navy during Vietnam.
Yes, he was.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And we're also going to hear from him about the uninterruptible autopilot, which is a very important piece of this puzzle. Because what's the theme of the show? We paint dots every week. In general, it's an Ephesians 5:11 show. We show you guys how evil, organized evil, operates in this world. One of the methods they use to keep the truth of things suppressed is, and this is something I think that Captain Dan is going to be able to comment on, but it is the compartmentalization and the specialization across all of society now. We now think it's a good thing to know what you're going to do when you're 18 and to start studying a specialty, like in college, at such a young age. And what do we think is the intelligent person in the room? It's, the dude with the lab coat that has a PhD in some very specific science, like, genetic biology or whatever it might be. And yes, he might be an expert in that area, and we are trained to think that is what a smart person looks like. But they themselves are also they're dealing with the same deception that we are. And the way these societies are structured is, it doesn't matter if you join the military or political office or intelligence agencies. The first thing computers do is secrecy. And Dan, I think Dan's on the line now. We're going to start asking a couple questions here in a minute. But are you with us, Dan?
Yes, I am, David, and thanks for having me on the program.
So this is Dan Hanley, a former United Airlines captain, who's actually living in Pakistan, and I believe it's like 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning.
It's 3:30, yes. I wouldn't miss this.
So on screen right now, there's discoveries of the week. Viewers can't see this at the moment, but I'll put a picture up when we put out our edited episode. And the picture was just from a few months back, where they showed a picture of a baby suffering measles, and it was MSNBC neglectful parents with vaccines, because this whole vaccine program, again, they're dumbing us down on purpose, and there is a they, and they really are doing it. So MSNBC comes out with this baby that is pockmarked with apparently measles because a neglectful parent didn't get a vaccination, right? This creates that pressure that where the sheep sort of manages themselves, the herd herds themselves, because we've all seen parents that you're putting my kid in danger by not getting a vaccine, to which some people reply, well, if your kid got a vaccine, your kid's safe, so.
No. Well, then there's a small percentage, I will say this, like me. I cannot have vaccines. I have
good. It's probably why you're
disease that I cannot have them. However,
it's actually probably a good thing.
It's your job to protect me. So
my job? Or are you saying that in general?
It's the world's job to
I
protect
understand.
those who can't be protected. Do I think that the measles outbreak was beyond over-exaggerated? Abso-freaking-lutely.
Well, look,
absolutely. Well, in Oakland County, I had to go and be tested for it because we had an incident where I was exposed to it and I cannot be vaccinated for it. I freaked out because of the amount of cases that there were in Oakland County. And then I was told by my doctor that there were not that many cases in Oakland County, that was not true. However, that I still needed a booster just to protect myself to be sure. But the amount of cases in Oakland County was not true. There were not that many reported cases.
And that totally makes sense. Because if we go now to the mainstream media, and I think we've established who owns the mainstream, they pulled this picture was a stock image, and they basically just dressed as someone at MSNBC basically did some video editing to make it look like this kid had measles.
Really bad editing.
But he didn't. So the level of things that are staged, Thomas Jefferson said it best. He said this in 1807, and things really have not changed. He said, and this was in a letter that it was written over 200 years ago. He said, "Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. The real extent of this state of misinformation is known only to those who are in situations to confront facts within their knowledge with the lies of the day." So it's not that newspapers are just endemically a poor medium, but the institution of transferring information to, thank you, the institution of journalism in the United States is now controlled by just a few people. And that was going on even 200 years ago. This plan has been in place for a long time. There's an image on here, and I'm not a huge fan of it. It shows this Jewish Zionist-looking character as if like he's the one in charge. And it is Zionist, but a lot of people confuse this with Israel. I mean, at the end of the day, the people that are behind all of these media outlets that you're looking at on screen, from, you know, the down the middles, the C-SPANs, the CNNs, the Washington Posts, to the edges of the Hegelian dialectic, like InfoWars and BuzzFeed and Vox. They don't care where you fall as long as you're in that spectrum. But we, for instance, are not in that spectrum because we don't have clamps on what we report here. So that's one of the ways they do it, is they create a lot of silent pressure inside of our own relationships, inside of our own families, where there's it's almost like characteristically built in for us to follow the herd, or there's going to be pushback. Mm-hmm. I certainly feel it. So these guys, this leads us into 9/11, and we're going to start to talk to Dan Hanley. But one of the things that convinced me early on, because I didn't just look at the details of 9/11, I started looking for who did this and why. And dozens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of clues kept leading to the exact same place. The people behind the Federal Reserve, the privately owned Federal Reserve. These are families that apparently, at least claim publicly now, to worship Lucifer. So, without a doubt, apart from what I'm about to show you, there are so many links between the folks behind the Federal Reserve, like the Rockefeller family, and 9/11. And one of them is something that appeared on not just one of our dollar bills, but on a sequence of them in order. And we've all probably heard of, if you fold a $20 bill properly, you can see the Twin Towers, right? Well, yeah, okay, I remember seeing that, and I remember thinking, well, one by itself, random chance, I could see that happening.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
But to get the sequence in the order that the bills, in the order of the value of the bills, you get the whole sequence of 9/11, that is now statistically impossible. And we basically proved this. We grabbed a magazine with, it happened to be a Housewares magazine, I don't remember the name of it. It had a lot of photographs on it. It was as random as we could get. We started tearing them out and doing the same fold we did with these dollar bills, and we were basically, we knew the experiment would ultimately fail because we were trying to fold it. How many times would we need to fold this the same way as this $20 bill was folded to get an image of a bathtub with water? And then we'd need to do 6 of them in order, showing the bathtub with a little bit of water, some more water, overflowing.
Right,
you understand?
absolutely.
It's a progression that gets shown. So to have one point on this arc is not, that to me doesn't mean anything. When there's a second one, it starts to open up my eyes. When the entire event of 9/11 is on the back of currency. So here we've got the $5 bill in the upper left-hand corner. And when it's folded, I don't know if there's a name for that fold, but you see both towers standing. $10 bill, we've got the first tower that's been hit. See the smoke at the top of the first tower. The $20 bill now has the second tower hit. You can see smoke coming from both the towers. The $50 bill shows the towers collapsing in that big...
But with nothing but smoke.
There's just
You can
smoke.
only see the towers at the very end of the peak of it.
The $100 bill then has just some smoke coming out of the rubble of Ground Zero. Mm-hmm. And what's crazy is if you go to the $500 and the $1,000 bill, you do the same exact fold, and you will see a red snake, a serpent, because a $5,000 bill is actually printed in red. You will actually see a red snake coming out of the ground. That type of symbology is all over organized evil, all over this planet. And we're talking to someone that that had a front row seat to it. And we're going to hear what the experience was like from his perspective.
Absolutely.
The quote of the day for us, because this ties into Captain Dan Hanley, this comes from Sibel Edmonds. She was an FBI translator and working in the translation office. She was getting... Now, here's a woman who, because she was a translator at the FBI, didn't have that same compartmentalization dynamic going on, because what was she doing? She was translating documents from all departments, giving her a bird's eye view of things. Because my best buddy's an FBI agent. They are trained to just follow. You made an oath. You follow that oath. You follow authority. You don't ask questions. You don't even talk about your cases with, like if he's on a narc squad, you're not going to talk about white-collar crime or fraud, electronic wire fraud. They don't share. It's not like they're at the water cooler sharing this.
Right.
CIA guys don't compare notes. In fact, they're not even allowed to talk to each other.
No, it's do, don't ask.
So when the guy's on his deathbed, who claimed to have been one of the guys asked to wire Building 7, this was less than a year ago, he said, I was part of a CIA unit, and I was asked to wire the towers, and was explained to me that this was for the good of America and the good of patriotism, and we were going to need to do this. And this is this guy talking. I'm not supposed to ask questions. I'm just supposed to do it. But you can rationalize anything if you trust your authority figures like that. So you start to piece together how this gets pulled off. And on the back end, these guys... So what Sibel Edmonds said in 2004, and she's talking about, frankly, the same forces that Captain Dan Hanley ran up against, which is her comment, her quote was, "And believe me, they will do everything to cover this up," which they have. So I'm not going to bore you with some personal stories on my end. Let's get to Mr. Dan Hanley. How are you, Dan?
I'm doing great, David. And you?
Good. Really good, actually. So
Good.
let's catch up with you, because you've got some interesting perspectives. But first, give us a quick background on Navy to United Airlines. How'd you get into flying? Give us the 5-minute backstory on your life and bring us to
I'll
Pakistan.
give you the Reader's Digest version of me. If anybody wants to really know about me, all you have to do is Google Captain Dan Hanley, and just Google Captain Dan Hanley, and what pops up is, who is Captain Dan Hanley? And when you click on that, it takes you over to my blog, Pakistanis for 9/11 Truth, and there's about 25 words of phrases that are hyperlinked. They're in green on that page, and when you click on that, it'll take you over to another blog, which is Whistleblowing Airline Employees blog that I created about 10 years ago. And if you read through those two blogs, you'll learn everything about me. But as far as my flying background goes, I wanted to be a pilot since I was a child. I build model airplanes, everything a child does, and my dream came true, but it turned into a nightmare. I started flying about over 50 years ago, flying a Cessna aircraft. And I got my private, commercial, instrument, and multi-engine rating between 1968 and 1970, and then I finished up my college degree at Southern Illinois University with a degree in math. Vietnam was still going on. I had to make service plans, so I chose naval aviation. So in 1973, I entered the Navy, and I flew, after I got my wings, 4-engine turboprop. It's a P-3 Orion. We tracked Soviet subs during the Cold War. I did that for a cumulative period of 10 years, and in 1978, I was hired by United Airlines as a new hire. And over the course of the next 25 years, I flew the Boeing 737, 727, 757, 767, and the 777, and the Airbus 319 and 320. And I might mention that I flew the same Cessnas that those alleged hijackers flew, and I also flew the 757 and 767. And we can talk about it later, but there isn't a snowball's chance in hell that those pilots flew those airplanes. That's a summary of my background. Do you have any questions, David?
I do. So we're popping up some images which we're going to show here. Hang on, though. There was a note I wanted to ask you about. So you've flown a number of different, like, big passenger airliners. I'm
Yes,
just
I
curious,
have.
to go from the cockpit of, like, a 737 to a 767, how long is that adjustment period for a professional pilot?
You always go through training in the simulator, and that nowadays takes about 6 or 8 weeks. But when you get into a new aircraft, you're not entirely familiar. I mean, 8 weeks isn't a long time to go through training on an airplane. So there's a learning curve after you get on a new airplane. But for the Cessna pilots, it's an absurd story that they got on those airplanes that day.
Well, so I've talked to a few pilots along the way, and they brought up the same question I brought up to you, which is even experienced airline passenger pilots don't just move, for instance, from the 757 to the 767, and they're flying it the next day. Even that itself takes trained, experienced pilots several weeks. Yet these guys, and right now on screen, and we'll have this up when we do the edited episode, but we've got the cockpit of, I want to say this is a 757. Looks absolutely intimidating. And this was successfully flown, doing some quasi-acrobatic maneuvers by a guy who was trained on essentially a Cessna analog cockpit, which we're looking at now, where literally hydraulic oil it's not electronic at all. You're actually feeling the wind that is up against your flaps and rudder, etc. And to go from this...
This is where the interviews had me. When I researched for Dan to be on tonight, this is what just had me like, wait, no. There's no way. They are vastly different.
Because even flying into the World Trade Center at the speeds they were flying, I mean, you're hitting what looks like to you like a toothpick in the distance, and you're coming up on it fast.
But you still have to get off the ground. You still have to get to where you're going. There's still so many intricate things to get to where you're going that there's absolutely no way.
So, Dan, when did you start to have doubts? Were you a doubter from the second 9/11 happened, or did it take a while for this to...
It took a little while. I was at Newark scheduled to go to London that night and slept through it and got up about 11 o'clock and found out about it on the news and came down and saw the smoking building. And I really was in New York. I had a phone call telling me that all the flights were grounded, and they threw me out of the hotel because people had already booked solid. So I went over to the airport and watched it on. I was one of the few people that got into the Newark airport. It was a ghost town, and I got downstairs and started watching it on TV, and I really thought, well, the nation's under attack, and I was waiting for a suitcase nuke or some dirty bomb to go off in Manhattan next. So I stayed around all day and caught a all-night train home that night, and so I didn't watch it till the next day on the news. But I thought, how did these guys learn how to fly this airplane? Because if you look at United 175 right before it hit the South Tower, the second one that was hit, it makes a sudden last-minute turn there that if they hadn't made that turn, they would have missed the building by 700 feet. So I thought these must really be experienced pilots that flew these airplanes, and how did they get the training to begin with? So what really started, I was working with really scared flight crews because I was flying mainly out of Newark, and the flight attendants I was flying with knew the flight attendants that died on United Flight 93. As a matter of fact, I flew the third flight out of Newark, and I went in and they were hugging and crying, hugging one another. It was really a sad sight to see. But they were afraid because what I noticed immediately was there was no added security. All they had was armed guards standing at the security checkpoint before you went down the concourse. And as time went on, this is what got me in trouble. I was getting pressure from the crew because they made all kind of promises like, we're going to put cameras in the back of the aircraft, we're going to have secondary barrier protection, we're going to have air marshals, we're going to reinforce the cockpit door. Well, they did reinforce the cockpit door, but nothing else happened. And so that's what I started reporting, because I had flight attendants and pilots saying, hey, there's something wrong with the system here. And I start getting blowback right away.
Hang on, let's
Well,
back up. You said you talked to another UAL pilot?
Oh, I talked to several on layovers, and I even went in and talked to my chief pilot and assistant chief pilot about it. And they said, the chief pilot said to me, Dan, we're trying to deal with these people in Washington, D.C., and they're tough cookies. They're tough to break. We're doing the best we can. So, long story short, I started filing, I started a correspondence trail because I was getting blowback. I had my union head in New York, who was a good buddy of mine, called me up and said, watch it, Dan, these guys are nasty. If you take it to the next level, you're going to get hurt. And I had a management pilot call me from Chicago and say to me, hey, Dan, why don't you just drop all this stuff you're doing? Because I'd been sending in captain reports and other things which were internal reports in the company. And he says, why don't you just drop what you're doing? Senior level management thinks you're a big mouth, loose cannon whistleblower, and they want you to go away. Well, I didn't, and I kept pushing. So I was going to send a letter to the CEO because I was getting all these reports which were federally mandated reports. They were getting stonewalled by the company. I wasn't getting any response, so I was going to write and prior to 9/11, they had an open communication policy at United where you could just walk into the CEO's office if you had an appointment and talk to him about anything. Well, all that went away. And so I was going to write a letter to the CEO of United, and my union boss says, please, Dan, send it to me, and I'll forward it over to the lawyers in Chicago, the union lawyers, and let them have a look at it. I said, okay, but I'm not going to sit on it, because this had been going on for like a year and a half. So I waited about a week, and I was getting ready. I was over in JFK getting ready to go to London again, and I'm at the food court, and I get a call from the lawyer, and he said to me, I said to him, and I had people sitting around me. He had me on speakerphone with another union leader, and I said to him, did you read the letter, Bob? And he said, yep. I said, you agree with the contents? He goes, yes. I said, well, you're my lawyer that I pay union dues for. What's your recommendation? He says, don't send the letter. And I said, wait a minute, I thought you just said you agreed with everything I said, and they're stonewalling me. And the union pilot sitting there said, go ahead and send that letter, and if you never want to fly another United airplane again in your life. So I said, well, how far can I expect union protection if I continue with this? And the union lawyer said, not very far. So I went back home and mulled over it for a while, thinking, what am I going to do now? So I decided it was time to bring the FAA in, because every other report I'd filed had stayed internal in the company. So I filed several of these called a Flight Safety Awareness Report. You file them electronically on the computer, and I sat one night, and it was a compilation of everything I'd written in the letter, segregated into 6 separate reports. And I fired them off, and the next day, I get up and I get a call from my assistant chief pilot telling me I've been taken out of schedule without warrant.
And what year is this at this point?
Pardon?
What year is this? Is this about 2003, 2004?
Yeah, 2003. 2003.
Now, just to so you talked to other pilots along the way. There's something fishy going on. It seems that other pilots have at least some level of awareness that something is off.
Right.
You were given advice to just sort of drop it and turn your back on it and let it go, which in some might seem like sound advice. Maybe on an individual level it is, but if everyone does that, we're screwed. What was it what motivated you to keep going? Like, knowing all this trouble you were already starting to encounter. Why was this so important to you?
I've got this in front of me. The Airline Pilots Association is the largest airline pilot union in the world. They have 50,000 pilots on the North American continent alone. Let me just read you real quick the first sentence of the Airline Pilot's Code of Ethics. It says, an airline pilot will keep uppermost in his mind the safety and comfort and well-being of the passengers who entrust their lives to him are his first and greatest responsibility. So this is all about aviation safety and security. I thought if I sustain the moral high ground, I don't violate company policy, federal aviation regulations, or the Alpha Code of Ethics, I'm untouchable. And that's what I thought. They can't touch me. I've got a long correspondence trail. I've got witnesses. I had pilots behind the scenes saying, keep doing what you're doing, Dan. They need to hear it. Well, I found out that was wrong, that it didn't work out. So you want me to continue with the story, David?
Please. Yes.
Okay. So I was out of schedule, and we were at an impasse because I got a call from the chief pilot saying, you've got to come to New York for a meeting. I said, well, I already know the union's not going to represent me, and I'm sticking my neck out here, so if I have a meeting, I need legal representation, and I'll bring my own attorney in. And they said, nope. So there was a lot more phone calls, emails, letters written in between. But what happened next was my chief pilot was out of Denver at the training center, and he runs into the chief flight surgeon for United Airlines. And the chief pilot says, is Hanley one of yours? And he says, yes. He says, put that expletive deleted on sick list. He says, why? He says, it came from up above, do it. So Bob Spielman, my chief pilot, calls me on the phone and says, Dan, I'm sorry you're on sick list. I said, for what? I haven't even seen an aeromedical professional. He said, my hands are tied on this one. I'm sorry it came from up above. So now I'm on sick list, and you only have so many sick leave days available. And I was going to run out of sick list. Well, I had overhead expenses like everyone else does. And so I called my chief pilot and I go, Bob, I'm running out of sick list. I'm going to go unpaid. This is punitive. So he says to me, and let me back up for a minute. I'd been around long enough where I had seen this happen to other pilots. So 6 months before I went down this road, I knew when I talked to the union lawyers, I said, what are they going to do to me? They said, they'll find some way of professionally, legally, psychologically, or medically ground you for life, or some other way. So what I did before they told me that was, I went down to Atlanta and found the best psychiatrists and psychologists I could find and said, look, here's where I am. Here's what they're going to try to do to me. I need to run every test. I'll come for counseling every week, whatever you need, just to prove I'm mentally helpful, to which they agreed, and I did. So when I talked to my chief pilot, he goes, Dan, you need to submit to the Employee Assistance Program. Well, that program is for people that have alcohol, drug problems, family problems, financial problems, anything that distracts you on the job. It's for any employee out there. And he says, it'll guarantee your pay will keep coming in. It's endorsed by the Federal Aviation Regulations, United Airlines, and the Airline Pilots Association. All you have to do is agree with whatever the company requests of you. I go, that's fine. So they gave me a first-class ticket up to Chicago. Then I went over to the aeromedical office and saw the chief flight surgeon there sitting in a room, and the employee assistance woman, Marianne Shepard, comes in and sits down. So he starts talking to me, and he says, first thing he says to me, are you seeing any mental health professionals? And I pull out my cell phone. I go, yeah, as a matter of fact, here he is. You want to talk to him? I said, Doc Mo, this is Doc McGuffin. I gave him the phone. And he talked for a while, and two other pilots showed up, the chief pilot, the EAP union rep, and I went over to him, and I had a FAA whistleblower report for him, because what I was going to do right after I got out of the office was go file an FAA whistleblower report. Well, it got worse. He got off the phone and said to me, would you be willing to go see a company-appointed psychiatrist? I go, sure. I was told I had to go along with the program. I'll do that. So two pilots said, we'll drive you over there. And on the way over, I said, here's where I am and here's what they're doing to me right now. I'm going to file this report as soon as I see this psychiatrist. So we pull up in front of Alexian Brothers Behavioral Health Hospital. It was a mental institution. So I thought, well, maybe the psychiatrist just has an office in there. So we go in and check at the front desk, and it was a Christian facility. A Catholic nun psychologist came out and met me and escorted the three of us to the room. And I went in there, and here I am, late in the afternoon now, and I'd gotten up super early, trying to explain to this Catholic nun the complexities of aviation safety and security reporting systems and why I was even sitting there talking to her. And I saw I was getting nowhere with her, so she said to me, well, look, you've got to see a psychiatrist and we can make arrangements for you to stay here tonight, resident, and you'll be able to see a psychiatrist first thing in the morning. So I said, I was real tired at the time. I said, okay, that sounds good. So she took me upstairs with the other two guys, and the first clue I had I might be in trouble is they locked the door behind me. They took all my belt and shoes, took all my personal belongings, and I thought I was going to get a private room. And they escorted me down a co-ed room, a wing, to a room that they put me in with a paranoid schizophrenic, I found out later, on a rock-hard bed. Well, they came back down and got me and said, you got to take medication for sleep. I said, I'm too tired, I don't want it, and they insisted. So I had to go down like one flew over the cuckoo's nest and stand in line waiting to get my medication in a cup and open my mouth to show them I took it. Went back down the room, and about 4 o'clock in the morning, they found me unconscious on the floor. I had a huge welt on my face. I was surrounded by a doctor and nurses in the dark, and my blood pressure was like 60/40. And they got me back in bed. They figured that the medication they gave me might have caused me to go unconscious. I don't even remember getting up to go and use the restroom, but the next day they rushed me in for an emergency physical. They were trying to cover their butt there. The second day,
Dan, that's where,
I was there.
Did you ever find out what the medication was that you were given?
I think it might have been Ativan.
Okay. That explains a lot.
So
I was just curious about that, listening to your interviews, like what medication it was that they gave you to almost just completely knock you out to be done.
Him. And yeah, they are
right, just to be done with him. Yeah.
Anyway, so go ahead.
So anyhow, the second day they didn't let me see the psychiatrist like they promised me, and so
now,
I
at this
had to
point,
go in.
Are you free to leave, or are you under some sort of you being restrained in some way?
Well, they said I had to go along with the program was one thing. I found out later that if you admit yourself to a mental institution in Illinois, the state can keep you there for up to 5 days. So yes and no. Maybe in the end, I'll finish this up real quick. In the end, I refused to cooperate with them and they let me go. But the second day there, I had to sit in with some very, very mentally ill people and eat dinner with them, and they made me attend group therapy sessions too. So it was humiliating. I was fuming. I called my chief pilot, and I said, I'm finished playing their game. So the third day, a psychiatrist, a woman came in. She was an Indian woman from India, and she sat down. We had a nice congenial conversation, and she said to me, we were talking, and I said, what's your diagnosis on me, Doc? And she goes, I'm going to say you're bipolar. And I started laughing, and I said, what indications do you have that I'm diagnosed that way? Because I have 2 mental health professionals in Atlanta that will beg to differ with your diagnosis. She goes, well, that's the diagnosis I'm submitting. So I said to her, she was an Indian. I saw her, she had a crucifix on. I said, you're a Christian woman, right? From India? She goes, yes. I said, have you ever read Gandhi's autobiography? He goes, yeah. I said, well, I'm going to pull a Gandhi on you. I'm going to passively resist the rest of this process. And I'm not going to play your games here anymore. So when I got out, my wife at the time met me. She was a flight attendant with United. And oh, by the way, they called my kids in Atlanta, United did, and told them their dad was in a mental institution. My wife, who's now my ex-wife, was a United flight attendant, was in London. They pulled her off a trip in London and flew her through New York to Chicago, saying something's happened to Dan. So when she got there, she thought something was wrong with me. And for my kids, the stigma had already stuck when I got home. Their dad was in a mental institution. So
yeah, and once that label, even if it is incorrectly applied, even if it is just an excited utterance, once that label exists, people just look at you differently. There's a few things you can say about it.
But I feel like they messed up with Dan a little bit, because I feel like diagnosing him with bipolar disorder, they screwed up in a good way for us.
Right.
Because bipolar disorder doesn't necessarily mean that you think things are true that aren't true. Bipolar disorder is just extreme up and downs. That's it. They would have been better off labeling him as a schizophrenic or, something to that degree. But they almost left a little bit of credibility with Dan by labeling him bipolar, because it's not that you believe that things are true that aren't true, even if you were. Even if hypothetically you were, you still know the difference between right and wrong and true and untrue.
Right. A bipolar diagnosis does not denigrate the validity of any of my assertions.
No, absolutely
That was
not.
So.
But they will. I've seen this happen to so many people that come out and speak about this monster.
Yeah.
But they've already got systems in place to get even your own family to turn out. You will lose most of your support system by design. And it sounds like it worked to some extent on you and your family.
Well, I have 2 adults. They're now adults right now, and they still believe the official story. They blame me for the divorce, and they knew I was in a mental institution, so they don't talk to me anymore, which is pretty heartbreaking for me. But getting on with the story, when I got out, I'm almost finished. My wife and I paid a surprise visit to an aeromedical consultant for the union, and when I talked to him in Denver, he didn't know I was even coming in. I knew the skids were already greased. They had already talked to the FAA, they had talked to the company in United, and they said, we need you to put in for long-term disability. Well, I thought, okay, I'm out of here on a medical grounding, but I'm going to fight it with the FAA. And again, a long story short, I spent 5 years of my life going all the way up. If you go to that whistleblowing airline employees blog that I talked about, it's got all the correspondence in there that I wrote to presidents, attorney generals, and it wasn't just about this. I was involved in another case that involved organized crime that I was trying to expose. But I spent 5 years and found out how corrupt the government was and how unresponsive they are to people when they have evidence. I filed a federal complaint with the Chicago FBI. I went up there. They wouldn't even accept a 164 meg hard drive I have with all the evidence on it. So I've lost complete faith and trust in the U.S. government. As a matter of fact, I'll just mention this right now. I'm real active on Facebook, as you know, David, and I do criticize the U.S. government and its foreign policy. And in May, my wife and I paid our first visit to the state in 5 years, and the day I made the reservation, the FBI in D.C. called my ex-wife and wanted to know everything about my trip. I don't even know how they knew I made the reservation. But when I got into Washington, to Atlanta, we were standing in line at customs in separate lines because she's a foreigner. And all of a sudden, there's a man and woman coming over to me and says, Mr. Hanley, can you come with us? And they whip out their badges, and it was the FBI and Homeland Security. And they take me over to the passport control office and stamp his passport. And the passport guy says, you know he's red, right? And they go, yeah, we know. So they interrogated me for a while.
Red is in on the red list? What do you mean by red?
I never asked him what that meant.
Okay.
But coming back out of the country, a month later, we're walking down the concourse, and another 2 came up to us and took us in a room and questioned us. And I said, look, I know I'm critical of the U.S. government's foreign policy on social media. Well, they knew every single thing about me, everything. They knew what groups I had on Facebook. And they kept asking me, have you been threatened? I said, no, I haven't been. But I feel like we're living in a police state right now. Or you are, I'm not.
Yeah, actually, there's probably less freedom in the U.S. than there is in Pakistan these days.
Yeah.
And, and those FBI agents, it's not like, in the way we tend to, imagine how this works is we think that they're in on it, and they don't know. They're just following the orders of someone from above.
Exactly.
And the little profile they have on him, they're reading it and trusting the information they're getting, which is saying, obviously whatever was put on that sheet for them made them believe that you're a danger, or that that you need to be dealt with in some way, and they think they're doing it for the good of the country. Like they really believe they're, because people don't get up to want to do evil. You've got to make them. You've got to make them think they're doing good, and
these guys were very nice. I mean, they're very professional and polite, and told me, we realize you have First Amendment freedom of speech rights, and we acknowledge your years of service with the Navy. Thank you. So they were nice. They were just following orders. I mean, They asked me if I was flying over in Pakistan. My wife buried her head in her lap, laughing. I go, hon, don't laugh. I'm just doing the job. Let them ask questions. So, can we get back to whistleblowers for a second? Because that leads into the uninterruptible autopilot. Because I need to talk about Phil McConnell. We don't have all that much time.
I was actually getting ready to interrupt you to ask about that because you had there was a statement that President Bush had issued that we were going to do this new technology, this brand new groundbreaking technology where we could control a plane.
Exactly. Right. After I didn't realize till after I found out about the uninterruptible autopilot and went back and listened to his speech. He said something on this order. And we're going to be developing new technologies where air traffic controllers or other can take remote control of commercial jet airplanes.
Right, made it sound brand spanking new. Brand spanking new, right?
Pardon?
He made it sound brand new, like it was this new information, this new technology that we were developing. And how long had that technology already been in place?
Since the 90s. Well, let me just go back real quick and give you a quick rundown. In 1944, the Navy had an operation called Anvil, and the Army Air Force had Aphrodite, and they flew remote. They took them off manually. A pilot took them off a B-17 for the Army and a PBY-4 for the Navy. And when they got the aircraft airborne, they bailed out, and then they'd fly by remote control these aircraft. This is 1944, over into Germany and bombard enemy target positions. As a matter of fact, this is how Joe Kennedy, JFK's brother, died. They had 30,000 pounds of explosives on board, and it blew up on him. It was a short circuit. But this is the important one. In 1984, NASA and the FAA conducted a joint crash test at Vandenberg Airport, where they remotely took off a 4-engine Boeing 720, flew it around the pattern several times, made 6 auto landings before they intentionally crash landed the aircraft. Now you can get on the internet right now and Google Boeing Honeywell uninterruptible autopilot, and it shows a short article that describes what I'm about to say, that it does exist. Boeing patented it in 2006. Well, that may be true, but the technology existed in the 1990s. And they also say there was a switch in the cockpit to activate the system. Well, that wasn't in any airplanes on 9/11. So the technology did exist, and the person that introduced me to this technology in 2006 was a captain named Phil McConnell. He's got a radio program out there now. I had a big email list. It was before Facebook and Twitter, and I operated it pretty much the same amongst airline employees. And one night I get an email saying this captain at Northwest, they're trying to force him to see a shrink. So I had his phone number and called him, and I said, what are you doing? He says, well, I've reported illegal modifications on Boeing aircraft, and they're trying to send me out to see an FAA quack shrink named Doc Elliott in L.A. I said, don't go. Here's what happened to me. And I explained to him, and he retired within a week so he could serve as an expert witness in future litigation. So he's the one that introduced me, and I don't know how familiar people are or how much detail I need to go into to explain what an autopilot is and how the system works. Do you think I should do that?
Why don't you give us a quick,
simple rundown.
60-second
simple rundown, yeah.
Okay, an autopilot can be engaged by a switch on a panel by a switch on a panel. When I say engage, you're just turning it on by hitting a switch. There's 2 flight management computers in the airplane, and normally you type in points on your route of flight. When you engage the autopilot will fly that route of flight. To disconnect the autopilot, you can turn the switch off on the panel, or there's a little red button on this steering wheel, we call it the yoke of the airplane. You just pop that and it'll turn it off. Or if the autopilot was engaged and you applied a 70-pound force on the yoke, it would disengage the autopilot. Well, with this uninterruptible autopilot, an external controller takes control of the aircraft, and no matter what the pilots try to do to disconnect it, even if they try to turn the switch off, the little button on the yoke, pull every circuit breaker on the airplane, try to turn on the yoke, it won't disengage.
So basically, someone else can fly this airplane that's not on the airplane.
Yes, somebody else can fly the airplane that's not on the airplane.
And there's no way that a pilot can override that.
That's
so
correct.
If someone wanted to bring an airplane down, they could do it kind of easily almost. Do you know where, where is this intelligence center that, when this happens, is it who takes over the airplane? Is it an air traffic controller or someone at the FAA?
Well,
how does that work?
Bush alluded to that fact, but I don't believe much what he said anyhow. But I believe, from what I've read, intelligence agencies or the FAA, and if you remember, there was an E-4B Doomsday plane flying over Washington that day. They actually saw it. But there were 13 war game exercises going on before and during 9/11, so it could have been associated with that. But it is an external force. You can even read it on Wikipedia. The article that describes the system accurately. But
they actually had.
Go ahead, David.
Oh, I was just going to comment. They had a lot more than 13 training exercises. That's about how many they had just on the morning of 9/11, mimicking a hijacking and planes flying into buildings. What am I saying? Planes flying into buildings.
Right.
Where, a few days later, Condoleezza Rice and George Bush are saying, we couldn't have imagined anyone doing this. Yeah, you can go back to 1962, and the Department of Defense came up with a plan to invade Cuba. It's called the Northwoods Report, and it was basically 9/11 presented in 1962 terminology, where we were going to remote control an airplane, which makes me think we probably have had that technology since before the 90s. Frankly, I think it would have been involved in the supposed mission to the moon, but whatever. Where was I going with that? 90s technology. Oh, and so this plan to create a false flag to justify an invasion of Cuba, so we could, my personal opinion, is get them converted to the same central banking system we have here, because that's all that's keeping us from world domination, or a couple of nations.
Right.
And would you be surprised that North Korea and Iran, the two most our enemies, quote unquote, are the ones that don't have a central bank? And if you've ever seen the amount of military bases surrounding Iran, but the way our media presents it is they're actually a threat to us. Come on, man. Okay.
It looks like a nightclub that I can't get into.
All right, so
David,
to be completely honest, the security around. And
David, were you aware that there were no, to the best of my knowledge, there were no pilots allowed to testify before the 9/11 Commission as to the absurdity of the official statement that these poorly trained and unexperienced pilots could fly these airplanes?
Well, there was so much left out. I mean, the 9/11 Commission, they didn't even mention Building 7. Technically, they did mention it. It was in a little a note to a quote, but the reference was the quote came from a guy that was standing next to Building 7. So yes, technically, Building 7 was mentioned in the 9/11 Commission report, but they didn't mention anything about its collapse. All of the witnesses that heard the explosions, the demolition explosions going off, none of them were allowed to testify, and if they did, it was behind closed doors, like William Rodriguez, who worked at the World Trade Center.
They announced Building 7's collapse before it even collapsed.
I know Willie.
It was still seen standing in the background.
Laughable.
Standing, perfectly fine in the background, and then they announced Building 7 has fallen, and it's right there in the background while she's talking. It's right there.
This
standing,
is the
fine.
equivalent of catching your husband having sex with another girl, and he comes up with a ridiculous story of why he was at that hotel with no clothes on, and you buy it. And you're sitting there looking at your friend going, you are the dumbest person I've ever seen. He's playing you, and how do you say that to an entire
nation?
Half the U.S. population?
You can't. Not without being labeled crazy.
Well, there's a couple 100,000 pilots in the world today, and none of them speak out as to the absurdity of these they weren't even private pilots. They were poorly trained, inexperienced pilots is what I described them. So the reason they don't, I know they don't believe the official story, but where do you go with it? Well, if I could plug my new radio program, I'm working with other people that are working with I'm not connected with the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry, but we are following their lead. I got a blog talk radio program, and it's called the 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers. And what I'm doing next week is I'm bringing on 2 highly qualified Pakistan Air Force, Pakistan International Airline pilots, and Field McConnell, the guy that told me about the uninterruptible autopilot. And I'm asking them 2 questions. With all your experience, do you, in your opinion, believe that the poorly trained and inexperienced pilots could possibly have flown the 9/11 aircraft? Well, the first people I interviewed for the program laughed at me when I asked them. And I said, the second one was, could you have flown the profiles yourself? And they said no. So what we're doing is we're getting them to sign sworn affidavits. And if we can get enough pilots around the world that will cooperate, which I'm going to advertise on our program, we're going to present it to a district attorney somewhere and hopefully litigate it, because no one's ever questioned that, and other pilots haven't spoken out, and we're giving them the forum to do so.
Well, there is a Pilots for 9/11 Truth. Are you, and I want to say that's Rob or Ray Balsamo's outfit. Are you?
Rob. I was.
Are you connected with them in any way?
Yeah, they came in and asked me in 2006 to join, which I did, and followed their work. As a matter of fact, they're the ones that invited me, but I won't go into it, but I had a falling out with Rob Balsamo, and he essentially took me off the list. So I'll leave it at that.
Why do you think, Dan, how do these big organizations like the FAA and United Airlines, where does the motivation on their part come to squelch your information as opposed to highlighting it and putting a spotlight, a good one, on you?
Well, I had a guy tell me he talked to a senior FAA employee one time, and he admitted that the airlines were their bread and butter. So if you step out of the line, you're going to cause the aircraft manufacturers or the airlines or embarrass the FAA. They're going to take you out. They're not going to let you get away with it like they did with me, or they tried to do with Field McConnell. So that's the bottom line right there. It's all about money.
All right, so Field McConnell, I'm definitely familiar with his name.
Yes.
There's another pilot that's been pretty outspoken. Do you know a man named John Lear?
Oh, yeah, I know John. I don't know him personally, but I've heard of his work. But see, now you're getting into the no planes argument, and I don't even have that debate anymore.
Yeah, I try to avoid the debate because for me it's like arguing. I use this metaphor a lot, but if a drunk driver runs a red light and T-bones my family's caravan, I'm not going to hold up the investigation because the prosecutor can't decide whether he was drunk on rum or vodka. Who cares? He was drunk, okay? There was a false flag on that day. What hit the Pentagon or Shanksville? Was it a missile, a drone? Was it really an airplane that disappeared? In a lot of ways, the opinion that is almost irrelevant. It's kind of like if you ever saw the movie JFK, there's a scene in there where Donald Sutherland, who's playing Mr. X, who is really sort of an amalgamation of a few characters, but it was based on Fletcher Prouty, an actual go-between between the White House and the Pentagon. And he made the comment of, basically the unspoken part is the people are dumb, so they're going to try and figure out how this was done, but they won't worry about the who and the why. This was what he was saying to, quote-unquote, Jim Garrison's character, Kevin, what's his face? Costner's character playing Jim Garrison. And the MO is the same, because if you really do your homework, you'll find out the people that were behind the JFK assassination are the exact same people behind 9/11, and we're just scratching the surface. This is so massive. It's what J. Edgar Hoover said. It's so big, you can't. Most people just can't get their arms around it.
Right.
So in Shanksville, are you familiar with Colonel George Nelson?
No, I'm not.
So hang on a sec. Oh, that might be Melissa calling in. So George Nelson, he was an Air Force officer, and he was actually an aircraft accident investigator for the military. He had a 50-year military career, and he came out and said this in 2005. And here again, before I even say what he said, I want to go back to, I want to just remind you that at the end of the day, the details of what actually hit the Pentagon is really very secondary or even tertiary. It's just not that important. And when you come across people that will not let you move on without coming to a conclusion about that specific part of this event, to me that smells off. And we do know that the truth movement is absolutely infiltrated with COINTELPRO agents, which are essentially American intelligence agents that are posing as activists, and some of them might even be running some of the websites we get a lot of our truth from. Hard to understand that at first. We're not going to go too much into that. But here's what George Nelson said in 2005. He said, with all the evidence available at the Pennsylvania crash site, it was most doubtful that a passenger airline caused the obvious hole in the ground, and it certainly was not the Boeing 757 as alleged. And as for the Pentagon, he said, at the Pentagon crash site, any unbiased, rational investigator could only conclude that a Boeing 757 did not fly into the Pentagon as alleged. He goes on to say, as painful and heartbreaking as was the loss of innocent lives and the lingering health problems of thousands more troublesome and nightmarish probability remains that so many Americans appear to be involved in the most heinous conspiracy in our country's history. And he sounds a lot like, you familiar with General Albert Stubblebine? Dan? We might have lost Dan.
Shocker.
So, Albert Stubblebine was a major general. He's got multiple stars. This is pretty high ranking. I mean, he was Albert Stubblebine, who was a general. He also was actually in charge of a unit that had 15,000. Are you with us, Dan?
Yeah, I dropped you somehow.
All right. So we're talking about General Albert Stubblebine, and I think you got cut off when I asked, are you familiar with him?
Yes, I am. I know what he said, too, but go ahead.
So he goes by Bert, General Bert Stubblebine. He was one time head of imagery interpretation for scientific and technical intelligence for the U.S. Army, which is a fancy way of saying he was in charge of a 15,000-man unit that was responsible for investigating military aircraft accidents. That's a man that... So here we've got two ex-military guys who specialize in the destruction of structures, the damage done by military weapons, airplane accident scenes. And I'm going to show you a third one in a minute, but this is a general, okay? And you got to understand, Dan, the same thing that happens in your life that happens in a lot of people's lives that start to speak about this thing is their life gets turned upside down. I guarantee you a two-star general has a lot better things to do, as do you, than to deal with the pushback that comes from this. Some people, though, just care too much about the truth. But here's what General Stubblebine said this in 2009. I don't know exactly what hit the Pentagon, but I do know from the photographs that I have analyzed and looked at very, very carefully, it was not an airplane. And he goes on to say that there should have been wing marks on the walls of the Pentagon. Did this vessel or vehicle or whatever it was have wings? Apparently not. The press is saying what they have been told to say about this. And he goes on to say that they had actually found the turbine of a drone, which a lot of people think was dressed up as a United Airlines aircraft. So do you have any? So tell me, is it that you have no opinion on whether planes hit Shanksville or the Pentagon, or are you in the camp of it just doesn't matter that much what actually happened?
Well, the problem I have with the Pentagon is I have people telling me that the left wingtip did leave a gouge mark in the ground, but the other big thing was were eyewitnesses that claimed they saw an airplane, and of course, like you said, it could have been a cruise missile dressed up like an American Airlines airplane, but the 4 light poles that were knocked down on the way in, that's unexplainable how that happened. And as far as Shanksville goes, a person I'm talking to who is of high repute in the 9/11 whistleblower truth movement told me that the forensic pathologist actually looked at body remains and claimed the DNA matched the passenger manifest. So I don't know what happened at Shanksville. I really can't. I know that it wasn't the big burning hole it should have been, and the debris was scattered over miles. So I really can't comment on either one of them. The only thing that I really comment and will say, I cannot absolutely prove that the uninterruptible autopilot was used, and I offer that as an alternative to people and let them be the judge. Was it these untrained pilots, or was it an uninterruptible autopilot? And the other thing, the speed of the airplanes that were tracked, they were doing 500 knots or over 500 miles an hour. That exceeds the maximum operating speed of a Boeing 757 or 767 at sea level by about 120 to 140 miles an hour. So that's what the radar claimed they tracked them at. So.
Is that just internal guidance for a pilot, or does a plane become unoperational when you're doing 500 knots just above the ground?
Well, the plane probably should come apart. You run into other problems too. So either the FAA tapes got the speed wrong, or they're lying to it.
So right now, you can't see this at the moment, but here in the studio, we've got a picture of the Pentagon, because we all, when we think of the Pentagon, we think of this partially collapsed building, right?
Right.
But the actual collapse of the 4 stories of the Pentagon happened long after, quote unquote, something happened at the Pentagon. So
right.
We're now looking at some images, because when it was first reported that something happened at the Pentagon had not even collapsed yet. Like, the entire building was still whole. And you got to ask yourself, where is the airplane in these photographs? Some of them are not very conducive, but there's no car parts have not melted, yet 8-ton titanium steel engines have vaporized. Here's a picture of the Pentagon. Now, this is the part that would ultimately collapse later on, which became part of that's the building collapsed because it was hit by an airplane, but it wasn't. Something else went off at the Pentagon long after the airplane hit that caused the facade to collapse, which is what we saw. But we're looking at right now a bunch of photographs of the Pentagon that morning, and you cannot find a single shard of airplane anywhere. Look at that. There should be an airplane.
Yeah.
We're looking right now at a close-up of the Pentagon. This is the impact point at the Pentagon. This is before the roof collapsed. And the official story requires that an airplane crashed into this building somewhere right in front of us. Yet you can't even find a screw or a nut or a bolt.
And then within a very short period of time, the FAA confiscated over 80 surveillance cameras around the Pentagon. There was a DoubleTree hotel camera that could have caught it. There was a Virginia Highway Patrol camera that could have caught it, and there was a gas station camera that could have caught it. And they confiscated all of them for national security reasons.
Right.
And if we had those films, I mean, why would that be a national security risk? Why won't they release those films?
Well, I think you and I know the answer. We're looking now at another image of the Pentagon. So if you look, there's smoke all over the place. So something has already happened here. However, there's something new is exploding. Now, some will argue, oh, that's a fuel tank from an airplane that it's very hard to see, or it was perhaps like the other buildings, as many people theorize, myself being one of them, that they were pre-wired to be demolished long before 9/11. And Shanksville, same thing. I'm sure, is there any type of training for pilots? Do you review accidents as part of your training?
No, I never did that myself.
So I only have the... Go ahead.
Wait a minute. I see what you're saying. Yeah, when you go out for training on a new airplane, they always show you accidents and what pilot error caused it. So, yes, we did review accidents when we were in school. But I never did any accident investigating myself. I thought that's what you were asking.
No, okay, so we're showing some images of historic airplane accidents and the debris field they typically leave. Because there's a certain signature to what an airplane accident looks like. And it's just strange that there were so many aberrations on 9/11, like no steel frame high-rise that ever collapsed because of fire, yet on 9/11, the only 3 in history to ever do it, all happened in succession. Right. We've all seen dozens, probably, of photographs of airplanes that have hit the side of a mountain or have crashed into the ground or even the sea. And the parts that are strewn around, it's mind-boggling. And it's something that would take months to clean up. Yet on 9/11, and at the Pentagon at least, and Shanksville, there was nothing. I mean, literally. So we're looking now at some old... this is what an airplane does. There's an image of a plane crashing in a field. You see the parts that are strewn for miles, literally. This one was a famous one in Detroit. I want to say Flight 255. Mm-hmm. Cecilia Sheehan, only survivor. Now, this plane was only traveling, just over takeoff speed, which I'm going to guess was probably in the vicinity of 200 miles an hour. Is that about right?
Yeah, that'd be maybe even high right after takeoff.
So when you look then at, you compare the historical photographs of airline accidents, and then we look at Shanksville, which just looks like a mound of dirt, and there's not a single airplane part anywhere.
Right.
How? How do they...
All I can do is speculate, David. I mean, there aren't enough facts and substantial evidence to point conclusively that it was caused by one thing or another. And I try to stick to facts, and one man I'm working with right now is an encyclopedia of knowledge regarding 9/11, and he's the one that pointed out to me that the forensic pathologist found body parts. So that was the first time I ever heard that, and I just heard that a couple of weeks ago.
And look, we're up against organized evil, and
right.
We've established this on other shows, but very often, it's not always, but very often, you go and you join like a secret society or a lodge, which you're thinking it's for charity and it's going to give you some good business contacts. And as you rise up the ranks, your life gets more and more intertwined with these. They become your social life, your financial life. It gets to the point where it gets very difficult to leave. And history is littered with quotes from presidents and world leaders about how this evil cabal is constantly gumming up the works, essentially, of the exposure of truth, and have been doing it for hundreds, if not thousands of years at this point. I mean, we are up against, at least in my opinion, Satan, who's the deceiver, not of a couple tinfoil hat wearers down the block. He's the deceiver of the whole world. So if you're in the majority, red flag right there.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how you ended up in Pakistan and what your next couple of moves are besides, and tell us a little bit more about the Blog Talk Radio.
Okay. About 10 years ago, I met my wife, right now, through a mutual friend in London, and we started emailing casually, and that turned into Skype, and we were on Skype for a long period of time, and I can't say I fell in love with her with Skype, but I cared enough about her to want to invite myself over to her birthday in late 2009. And I came back again. We both knew it was conservative society over here. We had both fallen in love, so we decided to marry. And I've been living here ever since then. And she's fully supportive of what I'm doing right now. About 4 years ago, let me just tell you what motivates me to form a group called Pakistanis for 9/11 Truth. It's that over the last 10 years, I've seen such atrocities on the news here, and the only English stations are BBC and CNN, and it doesn't get reported in the Western media. Case in point being, and this is the same month I established my Pakistanis for 9/11 Truth group, was up in Peshawar, a city up north along the Afghan-Pakistan border. Taliban broke into a school and killed 141 kids. There were 8 teachers, but 132 kids between the age of 18 and 8 and 18. It made the news like one day in the States. They commemorate the day every year over here. I've just seen such horrible atrocities, and the war on terror was forced down Pakistan's throat by Richard Armitage, who was then the Undersecretary of State for Bush. He came over here right after 9/11 and told then General Pervez Musharraf that if you don't participate in the war on terror, quote, we will bomb you back to the Stone Age, unquote. So they were forced into this war, and nobody knows this, but more than any country in the world, Pakistan has lost 70,000 people to terrorism. They've lost more people, and they spent $120 billion on the war on terror. And my hero, the current Prime Minister, Imran Khan, has told Trump, we will never fight another war for another country again in our lives. So that's why when I sat here and thought about and talked about to other people about how few pilots have spoken out, and I've seen what the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry has done, forcing the New York District Attorney Jeffrey Berman to convene a grand jury, I thought there's got to be a way of getting pilots to speak out. So myself and others created this blog talk radio program, and we can get call-ins from around the world, just like I'm sure you can. And we're going to take call-ins on the program and hopefully draw more pilots out of the woodwork that are willing to come out and say, yeah, I've got this experience. I couldn't have flown the airplanes myself. So that's it in a nutshell.
So what's the address for your blog talk? Did you already give that to us?
Yeah, the name of it is 9/11 Pilot Whistleblowers.
All right. So we're now actually looking at some of the stranger images of 9/11. One of them that we looked at the back of currency, okay, which sort of painted a picture of 9/11 before it happened. And it's not like that's the only example. Are you guys familiar with the Illuminati card game?
Yeah, just from watching things.
So
I wouldn't say familiar, but I'm familiar with the idea of it.
So this card game comes out in 1994, and it's called the Illuminati card game. And it circulates enough that it's out there, and people that have the set have since photographed each card, because the crazy thing that's happening is everything that was written on those cards seems to be coming true. So 2 of those cards, there was one called the Pentagon card and another one called the Terrorist Nuke card. Now remember, this was in a board game which was taken out of circulation in 1990. It was put into circulation in 1994 and removed out of circulation that same year. And it was, who was it removed by? The Secret Service. Think about that.
Really?
Because the Secret Service has 2 jobs. One is to protect the president. You guys know what the other job is? The other job is to protect the money supply. They're the guys that go after often like counterfeiters. So it's interesting that we've got essentially the police of the Federal Reserve Bank surrounding our president, and they're the ones that go do something that seems completely out of their job description, which is to go confiscate this game in 1994, because we flash forward 7 years, and these two images, and it's not just these two images on these cards, there's so many of them, but we can see an explosion at the Pentagon, and we can see an explosion at the World Trade Center, roughly at the same height that the actual planes hit it. I mean,
that's what I was just going to say.
They have telegraphed their plays, not just on currency, not just on the media, which they control, not just through these the information's out there if you want. We are up against an enemy that we are not really mentally equipped to fight until we open up our understanding of what is really going on in this world. But this is a spiritual war. We're getting close to the end. Dan, any last thoughts you'd like to add before we...
Yes, I worked with the Government Accountability Project and the National Whistleblower Center for several years in Washington, D.C. They're two of the biggest, they are the two biggest whistleblower advocacy groups in the country, and they told me late in the ball game that if you're a federal whistleblower in the United States, you have a less than 2% probability of winning your case. The whistleblower laws today aren't worth the paper they're written on. Anytime they try to change them, big corporations with their lobbies come in and put the kibosh on them. So if you're going to be a whistleblower out there, usually you start out not imagining yourself as such. You go out in front and to report something, you think you have regulations to back you up and laws to back you up, and more importantly, institutions that'll enforce the laws, and you get out there and find out that you have neither one of them. So I don't have any recommendation for whistleblowers, and I'll go to my grave knowing that the uninterruptible autopilot was used on 9/11, although I can't prove it.
Yeah, no, once you start to delve into these, it's like taking a cold shower. And I'll just...
Yeah.
The country that I discovered in the course of my own private 9/11 investigation, the country I discovered is not the country that I grew up in. Like, it had been veiled from me. Look, we're in big trouble, a lot bigger trouble than people think. And that's one of the reasons we do this. And it's kind of crazy, but you're better off. It's almost like the whole world knows 9/11 was an inside job, except for half the U.S. population.
No, they know too.
Yeah.
It's just a scary thought. It's a very scary thought. And just before we get off with Dan, I've watched, it's almost like fangirl status now, I would say, interviews on you. And I want to make sure that I say for myself, like, thank you for speaking out and saying everything. And I mean, you risked your marriage, your relationship with your kids, everything. And I know that, like, you're very happy now in the situation that you're in now, and I'm so happy about that. But thank you for risking that to be able to show me what actually happened, because it really does mean everything that you were willing to do that.
Yeah, totally agree.
Well,
it's a million.
Well, it's a common story amongst whistleblowers. It does destroy your life because you don't have laws to protect you. I've over the past 15 years, I've dealt with so many whistleblowers in so many different arenas working with those two organizations I just mentioned. So many broken families. It destroys you financially. It ruins your life.
And I don't think that enough of that is paid attention to. I think that the story is so great that you pay attention to the story part of it. Like, oh, we were lied to. You selfishly pay attention to the parts that apply to you. And you don't really think, like, this is a human being who risked his marriage, his life, his financial everything to give us the truth that we need, and that is
those are like
amazing
the Ken
to me.
O'Keefes and the Richard Gages.
Absolutely, you're amazing.
That
Thank you.
is the last line of defense we have. Are people willing to come out and say this? Dan, you're a hero as far as I'm concerned. I'm not trying to sound cheesy about it. I mean that.
Well,
sound cheesy because it's true.
Thank you for that compliment. I don't consider myself a hero, just a guy with a big mouth.
How can people support you, real quick, before we get out of here?
I'm on Facebook at Dan Hanley, and I'm on Twitter at Dan Hanley 4. If you go there, you'll see what I'm posting. I've also got groups, Pakistanis for 9/11 Truth, Afghans for 9/11 Truth, and Iraqis for 9/11 Truth on Facebook. You can join those, and we just take posts on 9/11 information. And I've got a lot of Middle Eastern and South Asian Facebook friends, and they're following what we're doing with this Blog Talk Radio program. So any way you can support that, that'd be great.
All right, so everyone listening, I would say Google Dan Hanley, Hanley, United Airlines pilot, captain, and support him. This is the kind of people that are keeping this society from imploding.
Risking everything and getting up at 4 a.m. to do an interview.
But everything worked out because he's got a beautiful wife and she's a major news anchor in Pakistan.
Well, yeah, no, mistaken. And it all works out. But we have to appreciate the struggle of what it took to get to where they're at. But yeah, no, your wife is beautiful, and I'm so glad that you're happy. But I just wanted to recognize what you went through to give us the truth that we need to have. So I thank you for that.
Very good point. Anyone else have anything else they want to add? All right, guys. Why do we do this? It's not to highlight evil. Today we were talking about how the truth is silenced. We looked at one little anecdotal example. The institutions of this world, which are not controlled by benevolent people, I believe, they will turn your life upside down if you're trying to speak about the truth. And someone somewhere along the way said, the truth will set you free, but first it will make you miserable. And it's absolutely true. And with that said, we're not here to highlight evil for the sake of it. But at the end of the day, at least yours truly believes that the answer to the evil that is out there, the answer to get off of this prison planet, which is find God, find out who he is, why he came here, because we're getting little peeks at the very enemy he came to save us from. And right now, most of us do not understand how this war is waged, and we don't even know that we are its prisoners.
Part of it. Mm-hmm.
We will all someday. All right, Captain Dan, you and I will be talking about other things. I feel like we're just starting to get...
Thanks so much, David, for having me on.
Thank you for getting up early. I'll be in touch with you. And 401 folks, we will see you guys next week. Peace, right?
Okay, bye.
All right, that was good.
Sorry I got so gabby.
No, that's the whole point.
Okay. What's that?